We have reached a very important milestone in the development of electric vehicles, and that is the introduction of second-generation EVs from traditional OEMs. A lot of traditional car companies created some compliance vehicles in the early mid-2000s in order to keep up with fuel economy regulations. Then in the late 2000s, they realized we actually need to make some true EVs and came out with their first-generation products, which generally weren't as competitive as the products offered by the startups like Tesla. But now we have reached the point where these OEMs, they've learned a lot and they're coming out with their second generation products. And for Audi, this is their first second generation EV, the Q6, shown here in the SQ6. So let's take a detailed look at this new Audi SQ6 e-tron to see what Audi's second generation of EVs is all about. To start, let's look at the design, and in standard Audi form, this is more of an evolution of their current design versus revolutionary different. This is unmistakably an Audi crossover, although there are a few changes. We have kind of this hexagonal pattern on the grille versus any horizontal or vertical lines that we would typically see from Audi. But interestingly, there still is this faux grille, even though this is a ground-up EV, and EVs do not need air intake at this capacity because there's no engine to cool. But Audi has decided to maintain this design aesthetic, and personally, I think it's still pretty nice to look at. It's very upright, which is also kind of interesting for a ground-up EV because that's a little less aerodynamic, but it does make this vehicle a little larger looking and give it some good presence. Overall, I think they did a pretty good job. As we come along to the side, I want to take a moment to discuss what this vehicle is. Basically, there was a brief moment in time when all of the German OEMs were really struggling to figure out how do we fit electric vehicles into our current alphanumeric naming structures, and Audi's brilliant idea was to make all even-numbered vehicles electric and all odd-numbered vehicles gas. They quickly realized this was not really that smart, and so they have since ditched that plan, but it was the plan for a while, so a few models have kind of come from this brief era in Audi's history. And so this Q6 e-tron, despite being very similar in size to the Audi Q5, is called the Q6. This is the Audi version of the Porsche Macan EV. The Audi version of the gas Porsche Macan is, again, the Audi Q5. So it's just kind of how everything worked out, the fact that this vehicle is called the Q6. And this model you see here is the SQ6, so it's a bit more powerful. The standard Q6 makes 322 horsepower in rear-wheel drive or 456 horsepower in an all-wheel drive setup. This model in its launch control mode makes 509 horsepower, so not a massive boost over the all-wheel drive Q6, but still a little faster. Coming around to the back of the SQ6 e-tron, it is reserved in typical Audi fashion. We have a lights bar, our 4 rings, and then our SQ6 badge and a little red parallelogram as well. And opening up the tailgate, we're going to find about 30 cubic feet of space behind the second row, which can be folded with these tabs right here. There's also air suspension to lower the vehicle and make it a bit more easy to load things into this car. When you fold the second row of seats, you're going to find about 60 cubic feet of storage. That space behind the second row and with the second row folded, both of those are just a little bigger than the new gas Q5. So this car is slightly bigger. The Macan EV is also a little bigger than the gas Macan, but not that noticeable. Another thing to note about that rear cargo area and the cargo area, wow, I'm raising up, and the cargo area with the second row folded, those are bigger figures than the old Audi Q8 e-tron, which is no longer in production, so this has more cargo capacity. What this doesn't have more of is rear seat legroom. The Q6 e-tron has about 1.5 inches less rear seat legroom than the old Q8 e-tron, and with this chair adjusted to about my ideal driving position, I do have enough knee room and foot room, although it is a little claustrophobic back here. And my thighs are also kind of high off the cushion because the floor is also high. We do have heated outboard seats back here and our own climate control zone. No peasant blockers back here. But we can lower the center armrest to reveal a pair of cup holders, and we can enjoy this panoramic sunroof back here. So I at 6'2" do fit behind my ideal driving position. It is noticeably more cramped back here than the Q8. But the biggest news I'd say with Audi Q6 is not only is this a new generation of electric vehicle, it's a new generation of Audi product debuting a completely new interior for the brand. And this is that interior. It has this big connected piece that has both your instrument cluster and your infotainment system. 14.5-inch infotainment system, does CarPlay, does Android Auto, the lot. It also has your climate controls integrated into the screen, which I'm not that big of a fan of. Fully digital instrument cluster, of course, Audi pioneered that. We also have an optional passenger display, 10.9 inches, which is polarized when the car is in drive, so the driver doesn't get distracted. And a great heads-up display that does a lot of augmented reality assisting. So if you have the navigation on, it'll display arrows over the road. If a car is moving slower than you in front of you, it will highlight the car red. It's a pretty advanced system. And all of that is fine. I'm not a huge fan of this big, like, kind of curved tablet thing just stuck on the dash. I think Cadillac integrated their screen a bit more with the dash of the vehicle in general. They have like this 33-inch curved display on their new EVs. But what I don't like about this interior is that some of the quality and craftsmanship that Audi is known for is gone in this new generation interior. And a lot of that has to do with the buttons. Audi for a long time had the clickiest, the most over-engineered, highest quality buttons in the auto industry. They were incredible. Clicking them was so satisfying. We don't have any of those in this new interior. Actually, we have them in one place, and that is the unlock and lock buttons on the passenger door. On the driver door, there is a blank button there, which is crazy on this $83,000 vehicle that we have this blank button up by the door handle. And everything else has moved to these touchpad buttons. So let me explain. Basically, every single area where there's buttons now is an entire console of buttons. I'm assuming this is far cheaper for Audi to manufacture than the individual super clicky buttons. So on the right side of the steering wheel, there is a cluster of 9 buttons on a single trackpad. Same on the left side of the steering wheel, and on the door panel, there's a cluster of over a dozen buttons. And when you press any one of these buttons on these individual pads, the whole pad presses down versus them being individual buttons. And it simply feels really, really cheap, especially knowing how good Audi's buttons were. It was something I thought of when I thought of an Audi, was their super clicky, high quality buttons. It really was just a symbol of their engineering prowess. This feels so cheap by comparison. Kind of the same deal with them moving to climate controls in the infotainment system. This simply isn't as high quality as having separated climate controls. Audi really cheaped out on parts of this new interior, and that's a tad disappointing. I'm a little upset by that. And not only are the buttons like not very satisfying to click and clearly cheaper, they're also just gloss black, which is going to show a lot of fingerprints where their old buttons were matte. So that is all definite downgrades. And since you're going to be interacting with all of these buttons pretty often, I would say it's a really big letdown on this vehicle. Now, happily, aside from these pretty crappy buttons, the build quality is still here. So when I open this door and give it a pretty hard tug, sounds really solid. These seats are pretty elegant, diamond stitched leather seats. I really like them. They are heated on this SQ6 E-TRON. They are not ventilated, which I would kind of want on my $83,000 vehicle. But if I take the center console and I try to shake the car, yeah, it's not going anywhere. This car is still put together really well. It's just, they obviously tried to save a few bucks on these touchpad controls, and I really don't like it. The rest of this interior is fine. Again, not the biggest fan of this tablet style thing, but it's not too offensive. There's this really cool ambient lighting bar that runs the entire width of the upper dash. And the coolest part about it is when you put your turn signal on, a section of the left side, if I put my left turn signal on, will swipe across green in concert with obviously the green arrow in my instrument cluster. Same on the right side of the vehicle. I really like that. I've never really thought about how the fact that every single vehicle just has the same little indicator that your turn signal is on in the instrument cluster, and this car still has that, in concert with now this sweeping ambient lighting turn signal. It's honestly really nice if in case you like forget that your turn signal is on, because it's exactly in your line of sight while you're actually turning and while you're just driving. So that's a great feature, and I love to see that Audi still is pushing the boundary in terms of lights. This car also has 8 different customizable daytime running light and taillight signatures, so you can have a different one for every day of the week. You just customize it in the infotainment system. That's pretty cool as well. Audi's pushing the bounds. This has an OLED taillight. So Audi certainly has it in certain aspects of this car, but some things I'm a tad disappointed about. But let's get this SQ6 e-tron on the road to see what Audi's second generation of electric vehicles drive like. For the purposes of science, let us do a launch control, because that is when this vehicle creates its max 509 horsepower. Launch control program activated, release the brake. A lot of torque from 0 to 45 miles an hour, I would say, starts to wean off after that. That is kind of typical for electric vehicles. You get most of your power down low, and then you kind of start to lose the horsepower, or not the horsepower, but the torque, because these vehicles don't have transmissions. But just giving it some gas in dynamic mode, yeah, you can definitely feel it in your stomach in this Audi SQ6 e-tron. You will not want for power in this vehicle at all, and that is good to hear on this performance Audi SQ6. Turning onto what I know to be a somewhat twisty road, if it's not that long, and giving it some power. Ooh, you know, I'm getting quite a bit of a lot of body roll around these corners at speed. That is not necessarily very performance oriented. This car doesn't remain really flat in the corners. I kind of expected a little more out of this vehicle in dynamic mode. That we are riding on air suspension here, but yeah, we're getting quite a bit of body roll. Steering is pretty direct, although it's not as heavy as I would have expected, and it's pretty light still. I mean, plenty of power for sure, but yeah, I kind of wanted there to be a bit more control in the side-to-side motion of this body. It doesn't remain very flat around the corners, even in dynamic mode. Very interesting indeed. All right, merging onto this freeway-like road, giving it some gas. Very quick indeed, very punchy. Getting up to highway speeds here. The car remains very quiet, which is nice. Let's change into balance mode. Things soften up a little in terms of the suspension, although the suspension remains very compliant even in dynamic mode. It's fairly quiet in here as well. And this car, I would say, is kind of comfort oriented in a way. It's a very comfortable cruiser vehicle, which I was a little surprised by, because this is an S. Now, S is supposed to be, you know, it's not an RS, it's not the all-out performance that Audi offers, but this does seem to be a bit more tuned towards comfort than other S vehicles I have driven. I did about, you know, like an hour-and-a-half trip on this vehicle the other day, actually to film the new Audi Q5 and S5, and I was very comfortable driving this vehicle. I also averaged 3 miles per kilowatt hour on the freeway. In a strange way, this Q6, this SQ6 seems to be more efficient on the freeway, where EVs, oh look at, there's an EX30, where EVs typically are less efficient than it is around town. Now, I have a heavy right foot, so whenever I'm pulling away from a stop, I do like to give it some gas or some electrons, but this vehicle is noticeably pretty efficient on the freeway, which is definitely a plus of this car. And it is really comfortable sitting here. The suspension is really compliant. Again, quiet. These seats are comfortable. They are massaging as well. And, you know, the steering wheel is nice to grip. I love the dimples on the side of the steering wheel, which is like classic Audi, kind of like golf ball dimples. We have some Alcantara in this interior as well, because this is the S, contrast stitching on the seats. So in a lot of ways, Audi's doing a lot right with this vehicle, but then when I stop to consider the competition, say, it doesn't necessarily feel like it is best in class in any ways. Like the Cadillac Lyriq, I think, is a prettier car than this. and equally, if not a little more comfortable and luxurious on the inside than this. I think the build quality also and the materials in the Lyriq are even a little step above some of the materials and build quality, especially these buttons again. This Audi SQ6. The Lyriq also has like kind of touchpad controls, gloss black, but overall Cadillac did a phenomenal job with their new interiors. And then there's vehicles like the Polestar 3, which is such an incredibly dynamic SUV to drive, similar in size and price to this Audi SQ6, which blows this vehicle out of the water in terms of the driving dynamics, how flat that vehicle remains around corners, and is also very comfortable in its own way as well. So, you know, there's nothing inherently bad about this, how this car drives, but some of the competition to this vehicle is so good that this car doesn't necessarily stand out. And I don't think Audis have ever really been the flashiest or the top like head turner in the industry. That's not really what they're meant for, but I worry that this Q6 might get overlooked. I think I've seen a lot of Macans in Macan EVs in LA here. They seem to be pretty popular because those are a bit flashier. The Porsche brand is a bit more premium than the Audi brand. But I kind of fear that Audi has dumbed down themselves a little too much with this SQ6, maybe to make room for Porsche. But this isn't quite the Audi of old that I know and love. So I hope that maybe a mid-cycle refresh of this car, they bring back some of their build quality prowess and maybe a little more character into this vehicle, because Audis were always clean and clinical, and this vehicle certainly is very nice, but it also just doesn't seem as nice as before, and its driving dynamics certainly aren't really there. So again, very comfortable, very quiet, probably what most drivers want and buyers want in this class. But when I'm buying an $83,000 performance electric compact crossover, I want a little more than SQ6 is providing. So that's the 2025 Audi SQ6 e-tron. This is a solid all-electric offering from Audi that undercuts its Porsche brother in terms of price by about $10,000, which is definitely a good thing. But it's missing some of the old Audi craftsmanship that I have always appreciated about the brand, and it's not as dynamic as I would expect from an S Audi. Something like the Polestar 3 with the performance pack was a far more engaging drive for a similar price. And even though it is cheaper than its Porsche brother, $83,000 for this fully loaded SQ6 seems like a lot of money for a compact electric crossover, especially when you consider how fast electric luxury vehicles depreciate. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in my next video.